This is...
Once Brazilian Jiu Jitsu got into the mix.
It's not Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Have you ever heard of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu before?
Yeah. I have.
Little bit, yes.
No.
But first, why does everyone call it Brazilian Jiu Jitsu?
It's not clear because it's always changing.
Here, I'll throw you a change up. Can you spot the difference? This is Judo.
Garrigos' attempt.
That's what
If you can't spot the difference, well, you're not alone, because neither can I. You see, the worst kept secret about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is that it's not actually Brazilian. It's technically not even Jiu Jitsu. In this video, we're answering the question that nobody's asking. Where does the name Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu come from? And why does this supposed Brazilian sport look so similar to these Japanese martial arts? Much of the research done for this video can be found in the book Opening Closed Guard, a link for which can be found in the description below. When someone asks, what is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? How do you answer?
You know, what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, it's not clear because it's always changing. And that's the only thing that's been consistent about the word Jiu-Jitsu since it's been introduced to the West, is that it's never stopped changing.
That's Robert Drysdale, IBJJF World Champion, ADCC Absolute World Champion. He wrote 2 books on the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and if anyone's an expert on the matter, it's him. So if even Robert Drysdale can't clearly define what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, then maybe the problem is in how we label it in the first place. What do Brazilians in Brazil call the art?
Jiu-Jitsu. It would be like going to China asking for Chinese food. Like, no one asks for Chinese food in China. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was associated with what was going on in the United States. No one in Brazil called it that.
That's funny, right? So I took it to the streets to see if the average person knows what the distinction is.
When you hear Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and regular Jiu-Jitsu, what do you think the difference is?
I don't know.
Do you know what the difference between Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and regular Jiu-Jitsu is?
No.
No? When you hear Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and when you hear Jiu-Jitsu, what do you think like the difference is between the two?
One of them's like oily.
One of them's oily? Which one do you think is oily?
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? That's funny.
This means the Brazilian part of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu probably wasn't added by the Brazilians themselves. So then why would the English-speaking world specifically add Brazilian to the term Jiu-Jitsu? Americans already knew traditional Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. Subtle foreshadowing. But those arts looked very different from what we know as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu today, specifically the lack of emphasis on ground fighting.
That's where the name comes from. It's to differentiate from other styles, not really out of national pride. That's originally, at least.
You see, Americans already had Jiu-Jitsu. Nani? Well, not that Jiu-Jitsu, but this Jiu-Jitsu. It's a traditional Japanese martial art, and it turns out it actually has the same roots from what we call Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu today. You see, the original Jiu-Jitsu term broadly meant martial arts, so it could refer to anything like hand-to-hand combat, weapon-in-hand combat, or just general self-defense systems. Which means all those clips from earlier technically still fall into the category of Jiu-Jitsu. Well, I don't know about that one still, but this, yeah, is Jiu-Jitsu technically. But we still don't know what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is.
Just think of the word Jiu-Jitsu the way we think of the word martial arts today.
But isn't it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and not Jiu-Jitsu? Well, you see, that actually comes down to where the Japanese was translated. English-speaking countries like the UK or Canada would typically translate it as Jiu-Jitsu. Countries like Brazil or Portugal typically refer to it as Jiu-Jitsu. So you see, it's actually the same Japanese word, just a different way of translating it. So when you say Jujutsu or Jiu-Jitsu, it's the same thing. Sounds similar because it is similar. Okay, so we're back to the general martial arts and self-defense thing, right? Well, karate and judo both look like pretty decent self-defense systems to me, so how did we get from this to that? Well, to answer that, let's first take a look at judo. And judo all starts with this man, Jigoro Kano. And in the lore of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Kano, not that important, but in the lore of judo, he's like the Wilt Chamberlain or Bill Russell. And if you don't know them, then you don't know NBA basketball.
You don't like that! You don't like NBA basketball!
You see, Jigoro Kano took a very specific form of jiu-jitsu, blended it with sumo, wrestling, Western philosophy and education, and he called that judo. At the time, it was still colloquially called jiu-jitsu, which caused a lot of confusion.
Initially, he called it Kano Jiu-Jitsu. Actually, he never called it that, but that's what people called it. And then he called it judo.
And Kano wanted to incorporate his martial art into schools as a means of enriching the lives of students. He saw his martial art more as a philosophy and a way of living, more so than just a martial system.
The problem is for the first, 20 years or so of judo's life, a lot of people were still calling it jiu-jitsu. The first wave of Japanese immigrants to Europe and the Americas, they kept using the term jiu-jitsu. It is not even clear what jiu-jitsu is because it represents various schools. Judo is just one of them.
Still confused? Don't worry, I got you covered. We have jiu-jitsu, jujutsu, and judo. So the jiu-jitsu and the jujutsu, they're the same word, it just depends on where you translated it. The ju in judo and jiu-jitsu just means gentle. The jutsu in jujutsu and jujitsu means technique or art. So it just means the gentle technique or the gentle art. The do in judo means way. So instead of gentle technique, it means the gentle way. Like I said, Kano wanted to bring philosophy into his martial system. And so it was more than just techniques or a self-defense system, it was a way of life. Because Kano was more interested in being a Chad than he was into fighting. You could even say he was the original Andrew Tate.
Easiest way you can guarantee a big viewing channel on your YouTube right now is to get me on.
The term jiu-jitsu was more associated with self-defense, like as in Aikido and Krav Maga, than it is with ground grappling like it is today. If you pick up a book from the 1930s that said jiu-jitsu, you're gonna find 99% of it is just like self-defense moves.
And if you're still confused, don't worry, so are they. Early students confused judo and jiu-jitsu all the time because both names were used interchangeably as the arts evolved. So you see, the confusion started long before the martial art even ever arrived to Brazil. How did what we know today as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu first come about in Brazil? Well, it all started with this family, the Gracies.
The whole beginning of this story is a man's ambition. It's Carlos Gracie's ambition. Like if jiu-jitsu didn't exist, he would have done something else. And he wanted to make it happen for his name and his family's.
Large-scale Japanese immigration in the 1930s brought martial arts to Brazil. And as the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lore would have it, Mitsuyo Maeda, a renowned judo fighter at the time, exposed Carlos Gracie to the gentle way. Or was that a lie?
Carlos goes, I'm a student of Mitsuyo Maeda. Maeda was famous. Even amongst the Japanese immigrants, they knew who he was.
Okay, wait, hold on. Who the f*** are we talking about? Well, both are considered the godfathers of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and both are pretty influential figures in this sport. So much so that if you take a look at anyone's Jiu-Jitsu lineage, which means the person who gave that person their black belt, and the person who gave that person their black belt, and so on and so on and so on, you will see Mitsuyo Maeda and then Carlos Gracie at the top of every single person's lineage, from mine to even Robert Drysdale's. For all intents and purposes, these two are the godfathers of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Or are they?
Now, this might be true. There's a very strong possibility that this is true because Maeda was fighting in his father's circus. Gaston, Carlos's father, owned a circus. And they were in the same city, and Carlos was training jiu-jitsu at the time, but he was training under one of Maeda's students.
That student? Jacinto Ferro, or Jacinto Feo. The R's are hard to pronounce in Portuguese, forgive me guys for the pronunciation. But this man, who's the actual professor of Carlos Gracie Sr., isn't found on a single lineage anywhere. So it would almost appear as if every single jiu-jitsu lineage out there is missing a name, or at least lying. You see, from the very beginning, the Gracies lied about their lineage, which was ethically questionable, but undeniably effective in marketing their martial art.
He starts tracing a version of judo / jiu-jitsu away from Kodokan judo. And you can see this clearly in the 1935 and 36 fights between Helio and Yasuichi Ono, where they don't agree on the rule set.
Okay, so who's this guy? Another Gracie? Okay, this guy, Helio Gracie. Remember when I said that if you look at every single person's jiu-jitsu lineage, you'll see Mitsuyo Maeda and then Carlos Gracie? Well, if you look at maybe 80 to 90% of lineages, you'll see Helio Gracie. He's not in every single one, but he's sure in fact on most. What's important to note here is that Helio is this guy, Carlos Gracie's little brother, and they would use Helio to champion their specific brand of jiu-jitsu by having him win real fights. Oh no, honestly, not that important. He's just generic mini-boss number one, decent judo fighter. By witness accounts, Ono threw Helio around 32 times and finished the match with a convincing arm lock. The only reason his brother stepped in to prevent his arm from completely snapping off. And the Gracies claim that Helio surviving 30 minutes in the ring with this guy was a big feat for their specific brand of jiu-jitsu. And look, not only did Helio not win the match, not only did he get ragdolled for 30 minutes, Ono had agreed to a very specific, altered version of the rules that heavily favored the Gracies in the first place.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
For one, they agreed to wear shorter sleeves, which took away a lot of the throwing techniques that Ono was accustomed to. Second, the match only ended upon verbal submission.
If I say short sleeve and you say long sleeve, or you say no gi and I say gi, are we really practicing the same thing?
What's a gi? Oh, and what's no gi? Gi is just like the jacket or the uniform you wear in a lot of Japanese martial arts. You might refer to it as a kimono. So when you say gi, you're referring to rule sets where you wear the jacket, and no gi refers to rule sets where you don't wear the jacket.
They're divorcing themselves from Kodokan Judo. They're creating a new hierarchy with themselves on top.
And the dude still lost. Look, the truth is, the Gracies had no chance taking on the vastly superior Japanese judo fighters. And so they carefully crafted a rule set to where even if they got ragdolled for 30 minutes, they still somehow came out on top. A little side note, I used to play Super Smash Bros. Melee pretty competitively, and in the competitive Melee scene, there's this term,
Please, no Johns.
and a John is basically an excuse for losing. And you might say it in tournament when your opponent loses and they say, oh, I got bad sleep last night, that's why I lost, and you might retort that with,
Please, no Johns.
well, the Gracies were the king of Johns. So changing the rules was clearly a marketing tactic, but it allowed their distinct form of jiu-jitsu to thrive and grow and differentiate itself from judo, which was popular at the time. I've been training BJJ for over 8 years, or at least I think I have anyways. And modern BJJ kind of looks like this.
The hip. Laverne, good job pummeling that leg free right now. Oh, and there it is.
So does that mean that Elio wanted to get thrown 32 times and use his special lying on the floor techniques? No.
But they were not ground oriented. They were still pre-war judokas.
What's a judo ka? Ka just means like practitioner, the person who does it. So someone who's a judo ka is someone who does judo. For some reason, we don't say jujitsu ka. I mean, maybe they do in Japan, but like whenever I'm writing my YouTube titles, I always struggle with what to call somebody. Maybe a jujitsu person, jujitsu practitioner. I guess I could say BJJ ka.
Their interpretation of what jiu-jitsu was still much in tune with what the rest of many people in the world were still calling jiu-jitsu, which was self-defense with a little bit of ground.
Yeah, it turns out he wanted to stay on the feet. He just couldn't. And so even though they introduced the cheesy rule of win only by verbal submission, I mean, it wasn't new because Kodokan Judo had submissions, but it was the first time a rule set fixated on that particular aspect of judo. Their marketing practices wasn't the only shady thing about the Gracies. You see, if anyone questioned the authenticity of their martial arts or the integrity of individual members, the Gracie family took violent measures. One of the sources I used for making this video is from the author Roberto Pradeira. He wrote a few articles and books on the matter of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu history, my favorite of which is titled Top 30 Myths and Misconceptions About Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Myth 11, the Gracie brothers were falsely accused of assaulting a man in 1932. Yeah, turns out that's a fact. They, meaning Carlos, George, and Elio, with Oswaldo serving as the getaway driver, they were arrested, charged, tried, convicted, and put behind bars. They were pardoned, but no one denied that they had been guilty. Elio later said in a 2001 interview that this assault was the worst mistake of his life. Look, their off-mat marketing and behavior was questionable, no doubt. But their stubbornness preserved jiu-jitsu during the rise of judo's prominence.
One, they stuck together. We're the Gracies. We're going to do it different. We're not going to be absorbed by judo. Where most schools were absorbed by judo, or they just didn't grow.
Not only was judo the more popular art at the time, there was a big push by the Brazilian government to absorb jiu-jitsu schools into the judo schools due to the fact that judo was accepted into the Olympics in the 1960s.
Most people would have said like, Dad, you're crazy. We don't want to do the jiu-jitsu thing. We want to surf. If we wanted to fight, we're going to do the popular fight. We're going to do capoeira and judo and kung fu. And they're like, nah, we're going to do it different. And I think that's incredible.
So now we're back in the mid-1900s and jiu-jitsu is not that popular. Not even this Gracie brand of jiu-jitsu.
There were other styles that were virtually identical to what the Gracies were doing. The idea that they were doing something new and original. Like, no offense, but it's not true.
If what the Gracies were doing wasn't even unique, then why are the Gracies so tightly coupled with jiu-jitsu?
They had 30 children, 20 of them males. Out of 30, in one generation, between two brothers, they had 30 children, 20 males. They made sure that those 20 males were teaching what they were doing.
Yeah, if that sounds a little crazy, it's because Carlos, he was crazy. The Gracies had a large family, and Carlos had a very authoritarian way of ruling that family. And I do mean rule.
Oh, be quiet.
Why are you guys so anti-dictators?
If you think about the typical Asian tiger parent, Carlos was worse. Men had rules for everything, like when you stepped on the mat, you had to bow. Step off the mat, you had to bow. Class ends, bow. Class starts, bow. You can't even look at Carlos while you're tying your belt. You gotta either look away or look at a wall.
We're not worthy! We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
This dude even controlled what his kids and students ate. Apparently he believed in maintaining a neutral pH in the body I mean, this dude's never heard of stomach acid before. No, seriously, look up the Gracie diet. This dude was crazy. So yeah, Carlos was authoritarian and very strict. But this dogmatic approach to life and jiu-jitsu is kind of what kept his particular brand of jiu-jitsu alive, especially under the influence of other martial arts growing at the time.
The big leap forward comes in 1975 with the rule set and Carlos and Gracie. And that's when things changed dramatically. That's what we practice today was essentially born in 1975.
The 1975 rules set by Carlos and Gracie marked the first distinct separation from Judo. This rule set was built on the foundation set by Elio versus Ono's match, where an ippon isn't an instant victory, it actually only counts for 2 points, not 100, but you also get 2 points for reversing someone, which is to say if you got thrown and then you reversed the position, then it scored the same had you thrown the person. There's also points for ending up in dominant positions like mount or side pin or rear mount. And this rule set was the foundation for modern sport jiu-jitsu. And Carlos Gracie's son, Carlos Gracie Jr., would go on to found the CBJJF, which later became the IBJJF, and is the dominant organization in modern jiu-jitsu competitions. Yeah, even that is based on this 1975 rule set.
So this is why I argue Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was really born in 1975, if you ask me.
Well, they were able to survive and even grow a little bit in Brazil, but economic limitations pushed them out of the market, and the next logical step was America.
Are you guys proud to be Americans?
Horion moved to the United States in the late 70s.
Who? Well, remember Elio? He's his son, which makes Horion Carlos Gracie Sr.'s nephew.
He wants to do in California what his father had done in Brazil. Teach jiu-jitsu, private lessons, doesn't work.
Horion needed something bigger, a lot bigger. Yeah, UFC. Ever heard of it? So it turns out the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is actually the history of the UFC.
91, there's a Vale-Tudo in Brazil.
Yeah, question. What's Vale-Tudo? Vale-Tudo literally is Portuguese for anything goes or everything allowed. It's basically just like a no-holds-barred fight. Think of early iterations of MMA. In 1991, Robson Gracie organized the Desafio Jiu-Jitsu versus Luta Livre. Robson is the second son of Carlos Gracie, which makes him Horion's cousin. One generation, 20 sons, remember? Luta Livre was another similar martial art to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It focused a lot on grappling, and it was very competitive with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because of just how similar they were. You see, there was a lot of tension between Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Luta Livre at the time, and it culminated in a few fights outside of the gym. So Robson thought it would be a great idea to televise Luta Livre versus Jiu-Jitsu and see which martial art was superior. Jiu-Jitsu won all 3 matches. Considering the fact that Robson set all 3 matches and was on the Jiu-Jitsu side,
it's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Maybe he gave them the favorable matchups, who knows. But this program did banger numbers. It was nationally televised.
Like having an MMA fight on CNN or something. That's what got Horion thinking. That's how we're going to promote our art. So Horion decides to put the UFC together in 93, and then it blows up.
And blow up it did. You see, Horion was smart. He chose to use his younger, smaller little brother, Royce, to enter as the jiu-jitsu fighter. He was up against some fierce competition. There was a sumo fighter, a boxer with 1 glove, a taekwondo champion, a samote fighter, a karate champion, and it's like those old martial arts films where all the martial arts gather together to see which one stands on top, and turns out it was jiu-jitsu.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
I mean, it worked like a charm. Like, it could not have been more perfect. It was the perfect marketing plot, and it was executed perfectly. Because they had the perfect guy to do it. Like, everything worked out, right?
From then on, Brazilian was cemented onto Jiu-Jitsu, thanks to Royce Gracie's success at UFC 1 and Horion's genius marketing strategy. The success of the UFC created a gold rush for Jiu-Jitsu in America. Tons of instructors from Brazil and some students flew to America to cash in on Jiu-Jitsu's growing success.
The joke goes, they're blue belts when they're in Brazil. They put their purple belts when they board. They put their brown belts on during the flight, and they land as black belts. Because if you had an accent, that's all it took.
The UFC solidified myths that the Gracies were promoting, especially exaggerated claims about their personal innovations. Each myth more exaggerated than the next. Like, did you know that Elio Gracie invented leverage?
Inventing leverage is like saying you invented gravity.
I know.
They say that he adapted his jiu-jitsu to his smaller style. And I think that's true, but I also think it's an irrelevant statement because you do it every day. Everyone who's training is adapting jiu-jitsu to their style, to their body size, to their attributes. So Helio did that? Yeah, I'm sure he did, but it's not. I don't think it's a great achievement. I think it's common sense.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Their exaggerated claims were useful marketing, but turns out it wasn't their only unconventional and morally questionable tactic. But more of that later. Guys, I want to take this time to shout out my patrons. Shout out to my Lao Gong tier, Alex Dow, and Robin Huang. You guys can check out my full interview with Robert Drysdale at my Patreon, or I just started my YouTube member page, so if you join, you can see the full interview there. Are the Gracies themselves ethnically Brazilian?
Well, they mixed. Their name is Scottish. Their great-grandfather, George, was Scottish. Originally, they're from Scotland.
Yeah, the Gracies aren't even Brazilian originally.
Bruh.
Look, I'm not trying to get flamed in the comments about race or ethnicity or any of all that.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I'm just driving home the fact that the Brazilian part of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not essential to the martial art. I mean, it is part of the IBJJF, Carlson Gracie's trademarked organization, but unless you're competing in his tournaments, you're not strictly doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But what about this? How did we get here?
It's been going through these transformations over the years. It's no-gi, now it's submission only. Now, if it's not entertaining, it's not real jiu-jitsu.
Well, just like the etymology of the term from jiu-jitsu to judo to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, the martial art itself has gone through quite a series of changes.
A friend of mine in Ecuador have one guy with boxing gloves on, the other one with headgear. And one of his blue belts protested. He's like, but coach, this is not jiu-jitsu.
There isn't so much a focus on self-defense or the gentle way of living. It's much more about entertainment these days.
What's the practical use of jiu-jitsu? Well, if you and I were in a fight, that would kill you.
I mean, definitely maybe. Call me crazy, but I don't think getting good at this is gonna really help you too much in a street fight. And guys, that's a real clip from the World Championships. So has Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lost its way? I mean, yeah, but from where? Because if you're saying that BJJ needs to go back to its self-defense and realism ways, then you might as well be Amish. That's like saying jiu-jitsu from only this specific period of time was the real jiu-jitsu.
It's different for everyone. Like, everyone's got a different idea of what jiu-jitsu is or what its purpose is. You know, what Brazilian jiu-jitsu is, it's not clear because it's always changing.
And that's ultimately what everyone gets wrong about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So if you made it this far, like and subscribe, and comment down below, domo arigato, Elio Gracie. I honestly don't stick to any one name. Sometimes I'll say BJJ, or sometimes I'll call it Jiu-Jitsu. Sometimes I even just call it grappling. Stay tuned for my next video, where we investigate if your boyfriend is doing BJJ, or if he's actually in a cult.